Hey, welcome to another Painting with Paige tutorial. Today we're painting fruit and I'm excited that you're here with me. Normally we have this feed on Thursday night, but I wasn't feeling so good last night, so we moved it to today and I'm kind of glad that we did. So first things first, let's get a couple of things out of the way. First of all, if you want to paint along with me, there are references down below in the description beneath this video. So there's a little arrow. You click on the arrow, it'll give you a drop-down description of what we're doing today. And you can access that imagery and what you're looking for. Let's see. This is what we're painting today. So we're going to be painting fruit. You're going to be looking for a download sketch like this if you don't want to draw along with me, and you can trace that or transfer it to your paper. And you're also going to be looking for this. This is a reference sketch or reference photos that you can use to do your painting. And the links to those artists, I did not take these pictures. I got them on Unsplash, and all the artists are featured below. You can click on their link and go directly to their page. All right. So next, let's talk about colors that we're going to use. But before we do that, if you're new here, my name is Paige. I'm the Chief Pixel Pusher and Paintbrusher over at Gumption, and I'm just enjoying quarantine and loving teaching you how to do some painting while you're in your downtime. This is a great painting for kids to paint along with, and for beginners who are new to watercolor, this should be kind of a fun, easygoing lesson, and it usually lasts about an hour. Okay, so let's get to our colors here. We're going to look at our supplies. So some things that you might need if you don't have. If you don't have, it's okay. But if you have them, you may want to use them. So I have a resist crayon. I'm going to be using that a little bit today. And I'm also going to be drawing some circles today, and I'm going to be using this coaster to help draw a circle. And I'm also going to be using one of these to draw a circle. If you don't have either of these items, you can use a cup that you have lying around, or I have a whiteboard eraser, but it's round and it's about the right size. I was going to use this if I couldn't find my circle template. So you'll need that. So you'll need a pencil, maybe an eraser, and colors that we're going to be using today are going to be green gold, sap green, cobalt teal. All of these colors you can mix with blue and yellow. So if you don't have specialty colors, you can definitely use those. I'm also going to be using a variety of corals and reds. So I might be dipping into opera pink, which is a hot pink, alizarin crimson, and quinacridone coral. And I'll also be using raw umber and neutral tint, and both of those are kind of different variations of a brown color or a tan color. You may also want to use a hair dryer if you need to dry some of your paint. I kind of do a round robin sort of affair, so I'm working on one item and then moving to another item to let the first item dry. So usually that works out pretty well for me. And I think that about covers it. So I think unless you have questions, we can move forward. Now feel free to use the chat or the comment area down below. I think it's down below the description. And let me know that you're here. And if you have any questions that come up, go ahead and put it down there too. And let's get painting. Okay. So first of all, I'm actually going to just be drawing my circles here. So we're going to be doing a little slice of grapefruit. And so I'm going to put this guy in the center here. And then we're going to be doing a couple of a lime. So I'm going to use a smaller circle for my lime. It doesn't matter how you place them on the paper. I'm going to do one on one side and one on the other. Now, if you don't have any cups or anything to help you with your circle drawing, just do your best and draw. It's fine. We aren't looking for perfection. Here we're just looking to have fun painting. Okay, next I'm going to be painting an avocado shape, which is kind of almost like a tear shape, but not quite. It kind of comes to a point at the top and is rounded at the bottom. So I'm going to do a couple of these shapes because we're using one for one half, the other for the other half. If this is your first time tuning in, welcome. I love it when people tune in and paint with me. Usually it's mostly my family, I think, that tunes in, but if you're new here today, let me know you're here. And hopefully we've had some problems with sound in the past. But it looks like we're doing pretty good here today. No sound issues. Maybe this is the best time to tune in and have class. Hopefully you're navigating quarantine well. Okay, so I've lightly drawn in here the shapes that I'm going to use. I think I'm going to, for my grapefruit here, I'm just going to kind of sketch in a circle, an inner circle where the fruit would be. And for the lime too. Now the lime is a little bit closer to the edge. And they are in sections. So you have the center area here. So I'm going to sketch in just a little center area for these fruit. And kind of divide them up here into sections. Notice I'm really using a light touch here with my pencil. If you need to scoot your paper around, feel free to do that. Like little pie sections here. And if you feel like your pencil is a little too dark for your page, you can get out an eraser and kind of erase it. I use a kneaded eraser and it looks like this. You can buy them at any hobby store. And they really are kind of the best kind of eraser, I think, for drawing anyhow. Okay. So we're good there. So I may take my eraser here and just dab this on here to lighten some of my line work. I don't think there's anything wrong with having pencil lines show through in your watercolor, but you might want to clean up some edges, or if you had a little oopsie, then you can correct it. Okay, and here in this top part of the lime, there's this little top part. Just gonna sketch that in there so I don't forget to paint that. Okay, I think we can get to painting now. So I'm gonna switch views here so you can actually see my palette cam here, and you can see the colors that I'm mixing. I think with our the first thing we're going to paint, I think, is going to be our grapefruit, because it has the most area to paint, so it'll need extra time, I think, to dry. So I'm just putting a little bit of water into my palette here. I'm going to add a little bit of yellow, I think, to this, and I'm going to dip into my quinacridone coral here and create kind of a peachy color. And you can see that's pretty orange. I'm going to add a little bit more water to it. And maybe some pink to kind of make it a little more peachy color. You'll probably hear my cat Harlow meowing in the background. She's okay. She's just wants to be where Mom is, and she's not allowed in just yet. Okay, another thing that we're going to do, we're just going to have a little fun with this resist crayon. I know I've used it in some other class stuff that we've done, and if you don't have a resist crayon, that's fine. Don't worry about it. If you have a white crayon, you can use a white crayon too. But what I'm going to do is I'm just going to, it's kind of hard to see in that camera angle, I'm just going to kind of dot it along in my grapefruit. And what this does is it resists paint, or it protects this kind of white area, so paint just kind of flows over it. If you don't have one, don't worry. Don't worry about it. Okay, so I'm gonna, let's see, I'm gonna test this paint color to see just how vibrant it is. And that's a pretty good little peach color, so I'm good with that. Okay, so I'm just gonna start painting on the inside of my grapefruit. And I'm gonna curve at the top of these sections here because grapefruit does that. And I'm not going to paint in the center area here, I'm just going to paint around it. So I'm going to use this color all the way around in the center of my grapefruit. Curving at the top here. And just moving around, kind of moving that bead around. And you can see these white areas are from the resist crayon. Well, some of these white areas are, I guess. And you can just, if you don't have a resist crayon, you can just leave those areas out. And at this point you could add more color into it while it's wet. So I'll just show you what that looks like. Got a little opera here. I can just drop it in. In these areas. Kind of swoosh it around. Give it a little variation. Okay. even do this in these areas here. Okay, so for now it's probably good. I'm gonna let it dry and we're gonna move to another section. Let's work on our lime. So you can mix a green with blue, I would say ultramarine blue, and a yellow of your choosing. I'm actually going to use sap green for this guy because I just love sap green and it's a convenience color as well. And I'm going to take my crayon here in some spots, I think. And get to work. So I'm going to preserve the white part here and just paint again like I did with the grapefruit. In sections. And I'm going to curve it kind of at the top. There are little white sections between these individual pie shapes, so you can preserve those if you want to. I think I'm going to be okay if they're covered here. Just going to go around. This can actually extend. I didn't draw this too close there, so you can actually draw with your paintbrush and extend it if you need to. Food illustration is pretty fun, and if you're looking for something to paint, you can always bake a pie and then take a picture of it and paint it if you want. Or fruit, anything that's in your fridge. So if you're looking for something to paint, there's always subject matter close at hand. Okay, so that's looking good right now. I'm going to leave that alone and let it dry for now. And I'm going to mix up, I have a color called green gold. So this is a more yellow color. We're going to move to the palette cam here. And I just need to add a little extra water here so you can kind of see how yellow that is. So if you're mixing blue and green, you could add a little extra yellow and a little less blue and kind of come up with this kind of color. Okay, so this will be a base for my avocado. So I'm going to use this in both the lime and the avocado. Okay. And I added a little water here to kind of lighten it up. And actually, I think I will just fill this whole area in with paint. Okay. So now we're going to go, we're going to do this other avocado as well, but we're going to go back to this lime over here. I'm going to put down paint all over this one. Trying to work pretty fast here before it dries on me. So this one has some shading. So I've laid down paint, I've dipped my paintbrush in some water and tapped it on a paper towel. And so I'm going to kind of lift here to create this lighter area. Next, I'm going to dip it into my sap green here and do some shadowing, shading here. I might need a little bit more paint, a little more sap green. So I'll dip into my palette here. And what I like is this paint can kind of granulate and move on its own and create texture like you'd have on a lime. You're gonna hear my stomach growling here. Let's see. Just kind of move that color around. I'm going to clean up this edge. I see it's a little spotty there. See if I can kind of straighten it out a little. And next, while this is still wet, you can add a little more blue to your green to make it a little bit darker. I'm adding a little bit of Sodalite, which is a Payne's Gray color. And I'm going to go along this edge because there's a shadow here. I could probably make that a little bit bigger. Okay, so I'm going to rinse out my brush now. And there's a little bit of light around this area of this nub on the top of the lime. So what I'm doing is I'm pulling out some of that color. And I'll go back in and darken some of that, but for now I'm just going to let it dry. And we can go back to our avocado. So I'm dipping back into my green gold color. And I'm going to go on the outside of the pit here because we need to paint in this pit. Just real lightly. I always find I have rogue hairs that wind up in my paintbrush. Thanks to my cats, right? Okay. Sorry, my stomach's really growling this morning. Okay, so now that we've done that, I think we can go back into our grapefruit here. I'm going to take a little tiny bit of my peach and dilute it down with a little bit of water so it's a really light peach color. And maybe, I don't know if you can see this in the camera here, but you can see it's barely a color. Just gonna kind of go in this area lightly. It almost looks like yellow here. And then I'm going to use this peachy color. I'm going to use it around the edge of the circle. Now I have some pretty skinny brushes. So this is one of those skinny brushes and I love it. Let's see if I have one that might be a shorter brush. This one isn't as skinny. Aha. Okay. So I'm going to use this little brush and I'm going to go around the edge, which would be the rind here. And just paint along that edge. You might need more pigment. Mine's pretty light here. If it blends into your inner part of this rind here and spreads, don't worry about that. You can always dab it with a dry brush. Or maybe you like that effect of the paint kind of blending in. We'll do a similar thing with our lime as well when we get there. Just adding a little more pigment. I want it to have a little more contrast here. So I'm just kind of dabbing into these areas. I think watercolor is perfect for food illustration, just light and airy. Okay. So now, you know, at this point for your grapefruit, you can go back in with pinks and corals and add a little bit more contrast and detail. So I'm going to do that here. Where these dividers are, I think I'm going to add some little lines here. And I'm using quinacridone coral here. Just giving it a little definition. And oftentimes around this edge, it seems like that the fruit is a little bit darker. Always a hair. Let's see. So I'm going to take a look at my reference photo. I've been using my painting that I did. What's great is, especially in this kind of painting, you can really do what you want. You don't necessarily have to abide by the picture that you're looking wholly. You can have creative license. And you can always have creative license, but... So I'm mixing a little of my quinacridone coral with a little bit of my opera pink here to get this color. And when you look at grapefruit, I'm going to bring this up here. You can see all these little light spots, and they have different variations in your darkness here. And in some areas, it's kind of more peachy, and then you move into more of a darker, winey coral color. Wine-like, I should say, not winey. So you really can have fun with this. You can just dab in paint like that. And go around the edge. You have some light areas preserved. Just go in and kind of dab it around. Maybe use a different color while you're doing this, while it's wet. And you can kind of give this texture. or add a little extra water and swish it around there. So I'm just going to do that. I'm going to go around the edge. I'm going to go around each part of this. I shouldn't say the edge. And just add some of these textures in there. Different colors. Kind of curve the top here. You can even leave reserve what you might call white space and do a line here on the side, so you're leaving this area with that light peach color. Sky's the limit here. The point is to enjoy yourself and to play with your paints a little bit. Especially during quarantine, I can't think of something better to be doing if you're stuck at home. Okay. And the tomato in your reference photo, I painted the tomato, but I think it might be a little much for our time together. Even if you're only able to paint one of these items, that's great. I thought maybe we'd do a class on the tomato using watercolor and colored pencil, so you'll have to let me know what you think about that. That might be kind of a fun exercise to be using some different tools. So I'm going to kind of speed up here. And I'm using a lot of my peach color, just dabbing this color in here. And you can continue to go back in here and play with these after they've dried to add even more kind of contrast. These are kind of some of my favorite color combinations when you're mixing yellows and pinks and reds even. I'm still kind of on the search for the perfect red, and have ordered some paint from a maker who makes their own paint. So I have high hopes for the red. Don't be afraid to dip back into your paint if you are running low. This is that. It's quinacridone Coral by Daniel Smith. It's a beautiful coral color. And see, this is an area that we've painted. Just continually go back in and paint. Now, one thing that I really liked doing with my other painting was going in and dipping my brush in some of this color, whether it be your coral or your peach that you'd done, and just doing little dots along the rind here. Oftentimes watercolor paint dries lighter than it initially looks. I think I use a lot of core paints, and they seem pretty good about staying true to their color. but as a rule of thumb, often it dries lighter. Okay, had quite a bit of this coral on this brush. Okay, so now, since this guy is dry, we can work on the pit, which is also a sphere shape, so it will have shading a lot like our little lime has shading. So first off, I'm gonna switch here to our palette view. This is raw umber here, and this is kind of the perfect color for our pit. So I'm just mixing up enough paint here to get started with the pit. And then I'm also going to go into a neutral tint. If you have a sepia, Van Dyke brown, or a darker brown, or you could bring in maybe a Sodalite or a darker color. Just gonna set this up over here so they're both kind of ready when I'm ready to paint. So I'm loading this brush. I'm using a round brush. This is probably a 4 or 5. I'm just gonna start painting in the pit. I have a rogue here. Just trying to fill all the space so there's not any white hanging out there. Clean up my edge a little bit here. Okay. So that looks pretty good. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to lift a little bit of color. So I'm wetting my brush. I'm going to dry it off here on my paper towel, and I'm just going to run it across this area where we have a highlight. Lifting a little paint. Okay, so that's looking pretty good. Now I'm going to dip into my darker brown while this is wet and just run this across down below, or tap it. We may have to come back for this, but that is a form shadow here. I could even lift some pigment right down below that, the very edge, for some reflected light there. We'll kind of let that dry because we'll have to probably go back in to that. Next, we're going to go back over to this guy while this is drying. And I'm going to do this area where the pit was. So I can take another, I can dip into my green gold here and do another layer where the shadow is here. And you can see in our reference image, this area is lighter. So just kind of do this half shape here. And you can go around this edge here. I'm going to zoom in a little. Hopefully this will kind of get it. I'm going to go around this outside of this edge because it's a little bit darker. And I think actually this shape needs to be more leaving kind of a half moon shape, so we'll fix that. You can go around the edge if you want and darken some of these areas just a touch. Now if you have a line that's too dark like this, you can always soften that edge, and how I do that is I dip my brush in my water, tap it on my paper towel, and just run along this edge to soften it a little. You could also go in and add some sap green if you want, because it's a little darker than this green gold. To add a little even more shadow here. So I might even, with a thinner brush, go around this edge here to define it just a little bit more. The tad sap green. Even soften that a little bit with some water. Okay. Okay, and I'm going to mix up some of this cobalt teal. Switch views here. This is cobalt teal. If you have a white and a turquoise color, you can recreate this color as well. But in the avocados, we kind of had a bluer green here. So if you wanted to mix up a blue and a yellow for your green and add kind of a bluer tone, or maybe even a phthalo blue in there, you can do that. So I've mixed up my cobalt. Let's see if I can get it closer to the camera. And I'm going to add just a little of my sap green in here. So it's this really pretty vibrant green. I'm going to zoom out here. I'm going to go around the edge of my avocado. You may have to water it down a little. And this isn't the rind per se, this is just kind of a color that you see around the edge a little. And we'll do this to our other half of our avocado as well. Okay, starting to come alive. And what you can do kind of at this stage, when you're looking at the reference photo, so I'm going to pull it up here. When you look at these guys, they have some variations in texture. And so you can also use this color to kind of create these areas that are mottled or where you can see that it's been sliced, just to make it look even more like an avocado. So you can just take your green and kind of, looks like I need to water it down a little, and just do some spots. And you can use your, like I am using my sap green kind of mixture, but I can go back in with my green gold because it will still create texture here too. How are you guys doing? Are you still with me? So I see on this edge, I kind of want to define this edge a little bit more. So I'm going to go back into this tealy green color and fix it. And then of course we're going to put a darker rind on these guys too. Whoops. So you'll add maybe a dark blue. So if you mixed your green yourself, you could add ultramarine blue, more blue to your green, or you can add Sodalite to your green, or you know, a dark gray like a Payne's gray, or just a more concentrated green. So I'm going to do that here next, and I had that really long brush. Hopefully it won't hit my mic here. We'll switch to my palette cam so you can see this is my sap green. I've used Sodalite on this end, so that's kind of a darker green color. I'm going to add just a hair more Sodalite. That might be too much Sodalite. We'll see if we can add some green back in there. And we're going to go for this one. It's good and dark. One thing that you want to be aware of when you have small brushes like this and you're mixing paint with it is you don't want any water here along the ferrule, because it will drop right on your painting and it will drop a big blob there. So I try to be aware of that when I'm painting, and have your paper towel at the ready if you need to. Let's see where I already dropped on my page here, and then I'm just going to go along this edge, trying to do it on the outside of the color that we've already painted in there. If you need to reload. See how nice and thin that line is? You can only get those with these skinny brushes, I think. So it's always good to have them in your arsenal if you do fine detail work. So this side of my avocado looks kind of sad, but I'm rolling with it. Okay, and I'm going to go along this edge as well. This is a good place to clean up edges if you have some uneven edges too. I think we can use the same color on the outside of our lime as well. So we'll do that next. All right, looking good. Is it starting to look like an avocado? I think so. So I'm gonna switch this around here. And I'm just going to do the outside of this lime while I have this color as well. There goes my perfect circle. That's okay. So we're just outlining this guy. Okay, so things are starting to come together. I might dilute this down just a little bit, and this is just a preference thing for me. Around this edge here, so I've diluted down that dark color. All right. So now we can kind of look at this other lime over here. It's looking pretty good. I think it's starting to have some definition and some form. Let's look at this guy. So with my dark color, I'm going to add a little bit of water here. And I can go around this nub here and define it just a little. I've dipped my brush in a little bit of water and I'm tapping it, and I'm going to kind of soften this. Oops, that's a little too much water. So I got a little too much water here. I'm tapping my brush in my paper towel and then sucking that water up. Go back in with my pigment here. You can just tap it in there since it's wet already. I think I might go along this edge here. So one thing I can see when I'm looking at my reference photo, and part of this is a shadow from another piece of fruit, but we've got some darkness here. Of course, we have some light pulled out here as well. So in clean water, I'm going to snag my round brush, dip it in clean water, tap it a little, and I'm going to scrub this area just a touch to lift color, and then I'm going to take my paper towel and blot it. Now, if you have good paper, you should have no problems with this. Sometimes cheap paper, it will lift the paper, or paper that's not quite right for your watercolor. So if you're having any problems lifting, that is probably why. And I'm just kind of going back in here to give that form. What next? So we might move back into our lime while this is drying, our lime section. And in here you can drop in color much like we did with this one. You can round out these top areas and give it a little more definition. I'm just going to go all the way around it. I might kind of define these sections for myself a little bit. Now typically these have white in between here. I have not preserved that white, but you could always go back in. You can do a couple of different things. You can leave that area alone and leave the white of the paper, or you can go back in with white gouache. if you like. And I would say you do that after it's dry, so you wait until you've painted everything you want to paint, and then you can paint in your white gouache when your lime is dry. You can even add in your darker green. Let it spread. You could also do this wet and wet, which we're still getting some of those effects in areas where it's a little wet still. Okay, so that's probably good for now. We will come back to this, but we don't have much left to do there. One thing I see here with my pit here is this is kind of washed out a little bit, and I want to adjust it just a little. So I'm going to dip into my raw umber that I had earlier, and then I'm going to add some of my neutral tint to that paint. It's kind of the neutral tint is kind of dispersing my raw umber. They don't want to play fair, so I'm just going to mix them together here. I'm just going to paint in this core shadow a little bit more. Tap it in there. There. Okay, so I'm going to let that guy dry. I'm going to look over here and see if there's anything else that I would want to do to that. And I might do another swath of darkness here on this side. I love how this has granulated and how it's working together, but it's a little bit darker. Oops. Along this edge, so I want to capture that. I might have to soften that just a hair. Tapping off my brush on my paper towel. Yeah, I'm liking how that is turning out. Okay, just a little bit more here. And then I'm going to dip into my raw umber mix and just put a dot right there. Good. And this kind of dark green kind of goes around here to the side. I'll let that go. Okay, so now we're going back to our lime here. I'm just going to add a light, really light green. I don't know if you can see this in the side camera. It's just really faded because most of this is dry. And just go along in here. That might even be too dark. Whoops. Just so it's not this stark white color. Great. Now I like to add shadows because most everything, if it's sitting somewhere, it has a shadow, right? So I am going to clean out one of my wells here and use a little bit of Sodalite to create a shadow, just real lightly. So we'll switch to our palette cam here, see what I'm doing. So this is my Sodalite. You could also call it a Payne's Gray, or use an ultramarine blue and just water it down quite a bit. You can see I'm really watering that down. So for these guys, their shadows are kind of here. And you can see just how light that is. It's really light. Whoops, you can't see because I don't have the overhead on. So I'm just adding this lightly here. Just going to do it on this one too because our light is coming from this direction. Because our shadow is here and our light spot is there. Of course, they have a different light source than our other fruit. This one needs a little bit more so you can see it. Of course, our lime is kind of the exact opposite. We have light coming from this direction, so I'll put the shadow over on this side. And I'll do the same over here too. Soften that with a little water. That helps give your little painting some depth. It'd be ideal if they all went the same direction, wouldn't it? Okay, so there we go. We've painted some fruit today. I hope you enjoyed this painting process today, and I didn't throw you too much for a loop there. If you have any questions, feel free to put them down here in the comments or the chat for me. I'd be happy to answer those questions for you. Before I let you go, I just have to say thank you for tuning in. I appreciate you being here. I also want to say thank you to Colin Jackson, who is my first Patreon subscriber, first and only currently Patreon subscriber. And you being subscribed to my channel helps me do these free classes, and I really appreciate it. Any other questions that you might have, go ahead and let me know. I have lots of videos right now out on YouTube that you can see. Some of them are these hour-long classes that have been live classes, and I also have some shorter 10-minute tutorials for you too. So you can always paint day or night with me if you want to. So without further ado, I think I can let you go if I don't see any questions down in chat. So until next time, I should have a live class going on next week, and check it out. They're usually on Thursdays, so I post them early in the week so you know when they're happening, so check that out. Thank you for tuning in, and have a great long weekend. I'll see you later.